Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. This one's going to be very different because I'm recording this in a hotel room in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. The reason I'm here is because this time next year we'll be doing one of our live shows here, and I'm not going to lie, I'm very much looking forward to that. I just saw the convention centre yesterday and it is amazing. It is an extraordinary place, along with the rest of Canada. I've just been up in the mountainous region of British Columbia at a little railway town called Revelstoke. Just outside Revelstoke is the Revelstoke Dam. It's a damn fine dam. It is a massive hydroelectric power plant. And it's very impressive, and we've recorded an episode about it, and I'm sure it'll be on the show soon. It has been a really one of the more interesting international trips I've made in my long and, I will admit, eventful life. And I've just been thinking about it this morning, about flying, about carbon reduction, about renewable energy, about the massive, well-organized, incredibly well-funded resistance to any form of change that is manifested in the current administration in the United Kingdom, but not elsewhere. And I think that's one of the things I would love to bring to this podcast is a more international perspective. So where I'm sitting at the moment, this will not amuse UK residents, British Columbia, and along with Norway. I think there is a lot of comparisons in terms of energy. British Columbia, along with Norway, are net exporters of 100% renewable energy. So the population here is not very large. The land mass is mind-bogglingly enormous. There are thousands of mountains and massive rivers and streams and enormous amounts of hydropower. That is what powers British Columbia. They don't have any gas. There's occasions when, like Norway, this is very similar to Norway. Everything I'm describing now is very similar to Norway. Like Norway, they occasionally import possibly gas-powered or even coal-powered electricity from the United States, their neighbour. But the vast majority of the electricity goes the other way. So the electricity generated here supplies states like Washington, Oregon, California. And when you go to a very large hydroelectric facility, you kind of understand why. Some very simple figures for people who are interested in such thing. There is 5.6 trillion cubic meters of water behind the dam. Unestimated, let's be honest. I don't think they've counted each one. 5.6 trillion cubic meters. It is a very big dam and it is a very big lake. Each cubic meter, when it drops 1 meter, produces 1 kilowatt. Well, this water is dropping around 75 and possibly even further meters. So the force behind that and the energy that can be extracted from it is mind-boggling. And the actual generator itself, not the turbine. The turbine is very, very noisy but manageable. The actual generator, it's so loud you can't go in the room, even with ear protectors. It's a 500 megawatt generator, and there are four of them. No, there are 5. Is there going to be 6? Anyway, they've got one yet to install, and they are massive installations, just colossal. So it's a 2.4 gigawatt power station. That's what it produces, which is just a little bit less than what Hinkley Point C will eventually produce. Only the dam has no waste products, zero carbon, obviously, no waste products. It runs whenever they want it to run. If they don't want it to run, they can turn it off. And they don't do that, but they could theoretically turn it off and let the water go over the spillway. It can come on in a few seconds very easily. There's no management of fuel. There's no importing of fuel. There's no fuel waste. It uses an enormous amount of concrete to build it in the first place back in the 1970s. Slightly less concrete than somewhere like Hinkley Point C. So there's a very good argument for something like hydroelectric power if you have the environment. And what, of course, is so that's the pluses. produces enormous amount. I've got to finish OnePlus. OnePlus Extra is that the average cost of electricity in British Columbia around the clock is 10 cents a kilowatt hour. That is about, let's say, at current exchange rate, between 8 and 9 pence a kilowatt hour. Now, that is kind of off-peak costs of electricity in the UK. We all know what electricity is costing. And if you're not sure what a kilowatt hour is, don't worry about it. It's a unit. It's often referred to as a unit. So it costs about 10 cents a unit in Canada, and it's just gone up. And that's caused a bit of a hoo-ha. So it's very cheap, incredibly reliable, 24/7. There aren't days when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. But they are also installing wind turbines because, here's why, they're cheap. They're very cheap to run. So, there's all these things are so painfully smack you around the face obvious. What is the cheapest way of generating electricity? Renewables. There's a huge variety of them. Now, there's no way we could do anything remotely like this in the UK. We do not have the geography to do it. I drove for 6 hours in an electric car yesterday across British Columbia, and for 90% of that journey, I was surrounded on all sides by huge tree-covered mountains. Okay, some of the trees had burnt in recent forest fires. Some of the trees had been washed away, and the forest had been washed away by recent incredible heavy rainfall, which damaged infrastructure, washed away highway bridges, etc. That was a couple of years ago. So they are experiencing extreme weather in British Columbia. They had the heat dome recently, where the average temperature in Vancouver and surrounding areas was 47 degrees centigrade. This is an area of the country that gets very heavy snow in the winter. It's not a southern desert. It's in the northern bit of the northern hemisphere. 47 degrees, never previously recorded. In the UK this year, we had temperatures of 40 degrees, never previously recorded. And we've been keeping records of temperatures since the early 1600s. But nothing is changing. Don't worry. Let's start fracking. We don't need to worry. Let's keep burning diesel in SUVs, especially if you're wealthy and you drive around in a big SUV burning diesel. That's fine, because you're not virtue signaling like, annoying tree huggers like me who are virtue signaling. That's the only reason we do any of this, is to virtue signaling. I don't know who we're virtue signaling to. It doesn't really matter. As long as we're virtue signaling, then we feel smug and better than other people. That's apparently what I've been told repeatedly. Sorry, just went off on a bit of a tangent then. But when you see the full-on results, we were in San Diego earlier on, where we did our live show, which I'm very happy and very proud to say was a great success. Enormous amount of people there, really an incredible array of vehicles. And we unveiled the latest Aptera vehicle. You'll see all this on the shows in the coming weeks. And VinFast were there. I mean, just the most amazing changes are taking place in the world, both technological and political. Okay, I was in America at a car show, and one of the cars that was on sale there, and one of the most popular ones, which had hundreds of people around it all the time, was a Vietnamese car built entirely in Vietnam. And I'm of a generation that has a very, very visceral memory of the war in Vietnam and how damaging that was to both Vietnam and the United States. And the fact that there is now a really good car company and a really big company in Vietnam that makes buses and does all sorts of things, VinFast, very big company. The fact that they are there doing in America, selling cars now, I just think is, in my lifetime, a fabulous turn of events. I'd much rather two countries were selling each other stuff than blowing each other up, which is why when people on the right, and I will discuss this very briefly because it is relevant, I'm afraid, to the energy matrix and the energy transition. People on the right accuse me of being a lefty. I'm a capitalist. I think it's really good when big companies start making stuff, get investment from banks, from capitalist institutions whose desire is to make money. And if they invest in products that you just burn and throw away, then I don't like it. But if they invest in products that you can use again and again that have less impact on the world, then I am 100% thoroughly in favor of a free market economy. That's where I draw the line. I don't draw the line and go, all banks are evil. I've met loads of people in banking that are amazing, creative, forward-thinking, progressive people. I've also met loads of people in banking who are absolute beep, 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 beep. I'm not going to even say, there's no black and white. There is no black and white. There is no right answer. There is no single solution. There are numerous difficult solutions that pose huge challenges that need painful compromise to achieve them. And we're seeing this happen day in, day out. And we're seeing massive increases in things like offshore wind in the UK and things like solar in the United States, in Australia, even in Brazil, against all the contradictions of the politics there. There's finally the message is getting through. If you keep burning everything, you're going to screw the place up. You're going to screw up the pooch, or whatever the term is. That is what we have to work towards doing. Not overnight, of course, but we need to stop burning stuff. And coming to Canada, which is essentially, I always think of as a sort of progressive half of the North American continent. And it is in some ways, but it's not black and white. Look at the Alberta tar sands. I met 2 people since I've been here who have worked at the Alberta tar sands. And I said, I can't imagine what it's like. And he said, you cannot, I'm not even going to pretend to do a Canadian accent. I want you to be proud of me. You cannot begin to imagine the environmental devastation. This is someone who worked there for 5 years and eventually left and went to live in a small town off the grid in rural British Columbia because they couldn't cope with the damage that was being caused by tar sands. And they're still installing pipelines to this day to take that oil from the Alberta tar sands over the Rockies, over all the mountains, through the forests and to the coast so they can ship it to Asia, to China, to Malaysia. So that is, I live in the real world. People go, if you live in a bubble, I live in a renewable bubble. Well, my renewable bubble is very transparent and it's smashing around in the real world where real, serious, genuine, long-term damage is being done to the planet we live on by pig-ignorant, short-sighted, revolting human beings who work in the fossil fuel industry. I cannot sympathize with them anymore. You should not be working there. If you work there, you should feel shame or just literally spit on people as you walk past them, flick them the finger because you don't care and go and spend all your money on another massive, fat, inefficient diesel SUV. Or if you're in the United States of America, it will be a petrol SUV because they don't make diesels anymore. End of rant. Well, not end of rant, beginning of rant. So let me quickly discuss this weird aspect of politics, and this probably is slightly more British than international. So I'll get a lot of criticism from people on the hard left, on the extreme left, on the environmental activist left, the people who will glue themselves to a road or chain themselves to the fence of an oil refinery. I have massive sympathy and empathy and understanding as to why they're doing that and support. But they would criticize me for being a corporate shill, for pushing the concept of private car ownership, of pushing the concept of building more roads, of thinking that people should have cars. Doesn't matter what powers the cars. That cars are intrinsically evil. They should all be banned. We shouldn't be allowed to have them. And that is a sort of hard left position, that the government needs to control what people do. The government needs to control individual freedom because when individual freedom is expressed, it is very damaging for the collective whole. And so that's the point. That's the place I am put in. I'm put in essentially a conservative capitalist role. That is how they see me, which is fine. You reach an age where that sort of stuff really doesn't hurt or upset or trigger. It's not a problem. I can deal with that because there are compromises. It's not black and white. It's really complicated. You know, up to the point of where does the glue come from that you stick your hands to the road with? It's a fossil fuel product. It's a chemical product made by large companies who use fossil fuel materials from fossil fuel to make glues. It's just very difficult. If you eat food, it's been brought to the shop in a diesel van. If you ride a bicycle, the steel has been made in a foundry that burns coal. The bicycle has been shipped to us using a ship that burns bunker fuel. The use of the bicycle is no argument. It's hugely better, hugely more sensible, rational reason to transport one human being on a bicycle rather than in a massive car. There's no argument about that. But we have to take the whole picture we all have to take the whole picture into account. I live in a farming area. How do you grow food? At the moment, you use a diesel-powered tractor to plant stuff, to till the land, to harvest it. We shouldn't be using diesel-powered tractors. We should be using electrically powered tractors that are powered by renewable energy. Of course we should. Can we produce renewable energy in the country? Do bears shit in the woods? Has the Pope got white socks? Come on. We know that we can do it. People are doing it, and we just need to do it hugely more and hugely faster. So that's where I get attacked from by the left. And I agree, we should. I don't want cars in cities. They don't belong in cities, in dense, urban, European cities. I want bicycles and public transport. And taxis. I want to be able to get around, especially when I'm old. I want to be able to get around in a city, and I might not be able to ride a bicycle. Quite a few young, extremist, hardcore, environmental warriors just think everyone should ride a bicycle. Well, I know people that cannot ride bicycles. So what are they going to do? You smug, virtue-signalling cyclists. No, you're all lovely, really. But, you know, that I don't think it means you've sold out if you're prepared to negotiate and compromise. You're going to have to do that anyway. We all have to do that. We have to do that in our relationships with other individuals, in our marriages, in our long-term relationships, in our parenting relationships with our children. That is normal. It is all about compromising, holding your position as much as you can without damaging other people. So there we go. That's the left. Now the right, this is just peculiar because I don't understand a lot of this. So if you're if you're an average conservative, a sensible free market, they put the individual above the collective mass person, but you've got a sensitivity to the environment, then, you know, a lot of conservatives, for instance, watch the Fully Charged show, buy electric cars, have solar panels on their roofs because they're often more wealthy. You know, those sort of people, it is not across the board. It's not black and white. And they are, you know, my neighbours are like that, you know, and we get on really well, and they tease me for, you know, and they say, well, a lefty like you. And I go, well, yeah, but a very, very extremist conservative like you. You know, and it doesn't matter. It's water off a duck's back. It's not even water. It's mist near a duck. That's how painful that is. But then when it gets to be more extreme, like our current administration, one of the things that is peculiar, and it's come out of America, as often these things do, it's a joy and a pleasure in goading and teasing and belittling and triggering your opposition. It's got nothing to do with your actual position on anything. It doesn't mean these are my set of beliefs and I'm going to stick to them. It is your beliefs are so stupid and dumb, I'm going to make fun of them and trigger you and then watch you as you thrash about arguing things and laugh. And I mean, I can understand that. I mean, I would describe it as pathetically childish, but it's certainly happening. So there's a lot of stuff where someone on Twitter, or they can say in a conversation, or they can post on their Facebook nonsense, or whatever they do, you know, we should start fracking because the libtards hate fracking. Well, why don't you start fracking? Because it's a really efficient, sensible way of producing a large amount of fuel very cheaply. What about that as an argument? And the problem with that argument is it's just not true. It's a really expensive, dangerous, short-term way of extracting a very small amount of very, very expensive fuel that will probably more likely increase the wholesale cost of gas rather than decrease it. If you're a gas company, just imagine, go with me here for a moment. You're a company that invests in fracking in the United Kingdom, not in the United States, in the geology of the United Kingdom. And I've talked to geologists at length about this. Our geology is not very conducive to efficient, cheap gas extraction through fracking. So if you're a gas company, and you've suddenly got, as this gentleman, I use the term in inverted commas, Jacob Rees-Mogg, is now the Minister of the Environment, and he's a man who cares a great deal about the environment, as long as he can literally rip the living out of it so that his companies that are fossil fuel companies can make money. Oh, and he's in power, by the way, and working class people in this country have voted for him. Just saying that. And he is going to encourage people to start fracking. Well, the areas where it's most likely for fracking to be as successful as it can be, and believe me, there's massive problems with fracking in the United States that we don't hear about. Huge, huge problems. There are now 12 million boreholes in the United States to extract gas. Why is that? Why are there so many? Because they run out really, really quickly. It doesn't produce gas for very long, and you have to drill more and more and more. And it's a last-ditch, panicked, screaming, tear-your-hair-out, hysterical attempt to maintain our reliance on fossil fuel. It is the most stupid thing you can possibly do. And when you hear Jacob Rees-Mogg say anything about fracking, one, he doesn't care. Two, he's doing it to goad the lefties. What a waste of his life. What a pathetic, childish thing to do. Three, it's not going to work. But he'll probably make some money out of it in the meantime because we'll pay for it, the taxpayer. But the thing I really want to make sure is clear, is when they were fracking up in Blackburn in Lancashire, when they were fracking up in the Lancashire area a few years ago, and it caused a couple of earthquakes, and they didn't get any gas out of it anyway, it was closed down very quickly. It just was an economic as well as environmental failure. And they stopped doing it. And they didn't stop doing it because they were banned. They stopped doing it because it's stupid and it doesn't work. The areas of the United Kingdom where fracking could be marginally successful are mainly in the home counties, in the very rural, lush, wealthy areas around London. There was an attempt to start fracking in Sussex. Our one Green MP was arrested while she was demonstrating against that. I can guarantee you that there will be no fracking in the home counties. That's Conservative voters, to a large extent, in the rural areas around London, and they are not going to have fracking in their backyards. One fracking drill site needs about 4,000 truck movements to get it drilled. So you're down a narrow little country lane past a lovely manor house that is owned by Lady Ponsonby Smallpiece, and she's suddenly going to have 4,000 trucks go past her rural idyll. I wonder if she's going to be fine with that. I wonder if she's going to ring her mate who's in the House of Lords, or even Mr. Rees-Mogg. It's not going to happen. So forget it. So let them talk about it. Don't get upset. Don't get triggered by fracking. It's a complete con job, and it takes years. It takes years. There's only one thing we should be investing in a wartime mode, as quickly, and as we should be, getting as many people working on this as possible, and that is renewables and renewable energy storage technologies that do that. We should be investing in those. It's so painfully obvious. Tidal, absolutely. We haven't done tidal in the UK, and we have the biggest tides in the world. We should be taking advantage of that. We do have the geography for that. Renewable energy is so dependent on geography. That was what was so obvious from being in Canada, that when you've got the geography that lends itself to that. And there's also now, what I saw was a massive, heavy industrial hydroelectric plant. There are ways of extracting hydroelectric energy out of rivers far less damaging than that now, on a much smaller scale, like multiple smaller scale turbines. There's ways of doing that wouldn't harm the indigenous population, which obviously the big flooding, turning a lush valley into a massive lake has environmental consequences, biodiversity consequences, First Nation consequences. All those things were ignored in the 1970s by the previous generation. This generation and future generations have to take those things into account. And when people talk about, say, a hydroelectric dam affecting indigenous people, imagine the effect of tens of thousands of hectares of land being ripped up and huge industrial processes of melting tar sands to extract the oil in Alberta. There were indigenous populations, there were First Nations living around there, but I'll tell you where they're living now. They're not living there. No human being can live within 100 miles of that area. It is a toxic wasteland, filth pit, nightmare. It will never recover. It's never going to go back to its original form. Well, it might do in a few thousand years. It's going to take a long time. Fossil extraction is the most damaging environmental activity we can do, but bar none, by a country 1,000 miles. It is just the worst way of using energy. Extracting a liquid or a gas, transporting it, refining it, using huge amounts of electricity, and then burning it once. If we could burn it 50 times, I might be in favour of it. You burn it once and you throw it away. And that way you throw it away is into our lungs and into our atmosphere. It is stupid. It is short-sighted. We know it doesn't work. We've been doing it for 150 years and we have to stop. Other than that, let me just say, Canadians are lovely. And it's been an absolute joy working here. And I'm really looking forward to coming back next year. And I want to thank BC Hydro for letting me go around their amazing hydroelectric power plant. That just mind-boggling how much I can't. There was a number of how many terawatt hours of electricity it's produced in its lifetime, and it is, it's essentially enough to power the world for like a month. The entire. It's like tens of thousands of terawatt hours. It's mind-boggling, and it doesn't. It's still running now. No one's had to get a truck and take fuel up to it. It's just rain and snow. Thankfully, they've had a lot of rain, but they've also had droughts here. I was going to say about San Diego, because we had the show we had in San Diego. You may have noticed, listeners, that I haven't really structured this. It's just spouting. San Diego had no rain. You just got to send British people into drought areas. They had no rain. I think it was 7 months, like not a drop of rain for 7 months. So we land in San Diego. We have a meeting with people regarding the show there, because this was like the day before the show. And we went out to a little cafe near the hotel we were staying in. And we had lunch. And while we were there, we kind of noticed that it changed. And we saw people running in and out. And they were running out to stop the rain coming into the restaurant, because the rain had arrived. They knew it was coming, I think. And I've been in Brisbane in tropical rainstorms. This was as heavy, if not heavier. So they had, as always, something like 2 months of rain in 2 hours. So all the streets were flooded. The drains just couldn't cope with it. It was mind-boggling. Then we had to get back to the hotel, which was only, I don't know what, maybe a mile away from where we were in this rain. We didn't have rain clothes. We didn't have an umbrella or, Wellingtons. And we were running through this terrain. Thankfully it was warm rain, but that tells you that weird stuff happens. I wouldn't know that because I don't live in San Diego. That never happens in San Diego. It usually rains a little bit all summer. It's a coastal town. It isn't a desert area. It gets rain. They've had phenomenal heat and then suddenly phenomenal rain and floods. I think we need to take the point. And I actually don't feel sorry for Americans when there's stuff like that happening, because they've been causing the problem. People I feel sorry for are people like in countries like Pakistan, where there's staggering levels of damage due to sudden incredible rainfall. And they haven't been churning out CO2 for the last 150 years. Far from it. And particularly the people who suffer the most. Of course, there's very rich Pakistanis who've got their private jets. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about normal people. The farmers, the people who live in the small towns that got washed away. It was horrendous. And that is what we're dealing with. And we never talk about that stuff on the Fully Charged Show for good reason, because nobody listens or nobody watches. If we use the word climate in the title, of a video, it gets the lowest views of anything we ever do. And I kind of understand that because it's such an overwhelming problem. You kind of don't want to think about it. I'm the same. We're all the same. I don't want to think about it. It's horrific. But every now and then it punches you in the face, So seeing the devastation from the forest fire, they've always had forest fires in Canada, always, but not this big and not at this time of year. From the middle of Vancouver, where I am now, there are mountains all around. It's stunning. I've been here once before. Absolutely stunning position this city's in. You wouldn't know it. We could have been in Idaho, on the flat plains of Idaho. You couldn't see a hill at all, or even the outline of one, because of smoke from fires, and the air quality goes down the pan. And this is a really clean city, and they've got a lot of electric vehicles, and they've got, as I experienced yesterday, a fully functioning charging infrastructure. When I got into my little hotel room in Revelstoke, saying that right, lovely little town, I looked out my window, there's a load of Tesla superchargers in the car park. It was comfort. It was a comfort blanket for me. I didn't have a Tesla, but just knowing that was there. And around the other side of the car park was a load of Electrify Canada chargers. So there we go. That's what life is like in Canada. It's a beautiful country. If you ever get the chance, if you've never been to Canada, you get the chance, because all the razzmatazz and hasacha is all about America and New York and Miami, and that's where people go on holiday, and Los Angeles, the movie industry, and San Francisco, the tech industry. Very rarely, do you hear in sort of hipster media about Vancouver, British Columbia, and Canada in general. And it is a stunning place. It is beautiful. Very mild climate, very, very nice people. A lot of massive social problems, drug problems, of course, because, as I end this podcast, nothing is black and white. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. We'll be back to a normal podcast next week. But that's it. If you have been, thank you for listening.